When I first started making the videos for my online course called Rehab Works, I decided that the first module ought to be a basic presentation on substance use disorder, how you diagnose it, how you treat it, difference between social use and addiction, things like that. In the very first video I made, it's 3.5 minutes long, and I called it Terms of Confusion. And it goes right to the heart of the first thing that needs to happen when we start treatment, and that's making sure that everybody's on the same page as far as understanding what it is that we're treating. And it starts off by just pointing out how many terms there are that we use to refer to the different patterns of substance use. Substance abuse, substance misuse, addiction, chemical dependency. You see what I mean? And it makes the point that most people have a general idea that substance use occurs on a spectrum that ranges from mild to severe. But then there's another spectrum that ranges from medical or diagnostic terminology to the general public or layperson's terms. And it gets to the point in the video where it says, put this all together and it creates what I call a matrix of confusion. And what ends up happening is this sort of cross-pollination occurs. And like a bad game of telephone, people mix and match these terms and come up with their own definitions of what they all mean. And then we end up lumping them all together into one default term, which is problem. What does it mean to have a problem? And the video closes by making the point that there's a good chance that the client's definition, the family's definition, and the clinical team's definition of what it means to have a problem are all different. And so right off the bat, we see how important it is to make sure that everybody's getting on the same page with regard to understanding what the problem is. And then, as I said, the rest of the module goes into more detail about exactly what it means to have a substance use disorder. So the day that I finished the last video for that module, I was sort of excited about all these videos I just made, and I happened to have a family session with a client that day. An 18-year-old kid, he'd been through residential treatment. I was working with him now doing his aftercare. So he and his parents show up for this session, and because I can be sort of impulsive and spontaneous at times, I say to him, come here, I want to show you something. And we go into the big group room and we sit down, and I make him watch this whole module. So I'm getting to watch this family as they watch the new presentation that I just put together. And as soon as we get done, the dad looks over at me and he says, that was a punch in the gut. And I'm sort of like, huh? And he looks at his kid and he says, was that not a punch in the gut? And I wasn't exactly sure where he was going with that. But then he says, that part about the cross-pollination and everybody coming up with their own definitions, that's exactly what we've been arguing about since the day we checked him into rehab. And what he was talking about was that the client's drug of choice was opiate pain pills. And he acknowledged the need to stop doing that. But he also smoked a heck of a lot of pot, and he wasn't bought in that he needed to quit that too. And the family had been going around and around on this, arguing about the definition of addiction, what his diagnosis was, whether he could be an opiate addict but not a marijuana addict. And the bottom line is, this was a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier when I referred to important stuff falling through the cracks when there's a gap between the client, the family, and the treatment team. And here you can see how the family ended up in that substitute teacher role. Because I'll guarantee you that the client learned in treatment that smoking pot was not going to be part of his recovery plan. And the parents had a pretty good idea that he wasn't supposed to be doing that, but because they weren't there in treatment with him, they weren't 100% sure about how to respond when he got home and started working him over on this one. But here we were sitting in my office, and after 45 minutes of some simple little videos explaining what it means to be diagnosed with substance use disorder, the dad's looking at the kids saying, the jig is up, and I'm calling BS on the fact that we've been arguing about this for so long. And what I was witnessing right there in front of my eyes was a family moving from the substitute teacher role to everyone being on the same page. And all of a sudden we hit this beautiful thing that we call treatment accountability. So again, this is a good example of how easy it is for important things to fall through the cracks. And it also shows us how becoming an educated consumer is a really simple solution to avoid that from happening. Learning everything you can about addiction and how addiction is treated is what's going to put you in the position of knowing how to respond to these kind of situations.